You're listening to When Love Comes, the podcast, a safe space for single women of faith on a journey of healing, growth, and preparing for the love you deserve. This resource was created with you in mind, so you'll be ready when love comes. Hey, y'all, welcome back to When Love Comes, the podcast. I am super excited for this episode. I am your host, April Nowlin. I am a divorce recovery and relationship coach, and I am on this crazy mission to help people heal from the trauma of heartbreak and prepare for the love that they deserve. Let me tell y'all something. After 3 failed marriages, one thing that I knew for sure, I didn't know what healthy relationships were. I didn't know how to even seek out a healthy relationship. So for the last 5 years, I've done nothing but that. Learn about relationships, just immerse myself into relationships so that I can bring you guys resources like this so that you're ready when love comes. So I'm excited about my guest today. She is joining me all the way from Barbados. And so I have promised her that I need to get out there this year and hang out with her and just have some fun. But I want to welcome to the podcast Kamisha King. Kamisha is the CEO of Queen's Mindset, and we're going to find out what that means. I met her a couple years ago virtually and have just fallen in love with the work that she does, the way that she supports women. So I had to have her on this podcast. She has been in over 500 publications, which is crazy amazing that she is using her voice just to inspire and uplift women. So welcome to the podcast, Kamisha.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and good night. Good night to all of our listeners out there. It's such an honor and a privilege to be in this space to share with you here tonight. I am excited to see what God is going to do.
Yes, I am so excited to have you. So I want to jump in. Queen's Mindset. When I saw that, I was like, man, when we think about our minds and think about how important our thoughts are, I'm like, Queen's Mindset. Tell us what that's all about.
Oh, absolutely. And so Queen's mindset, it really talks about your mind. Literally, it means exactly what the word says when you hear it. It's about having a mindset of kingdom, and a mindset of kingdom in so many different terms. But in terms of who you are, how you see yourself, operating in that space of royalty, who God has called us to be as women. And so we have been called for more, called for greater, and we are his royal priesthood, and he loves us unconditionally, and it's important that we view ourselves exactly how God views us. And so when we talk about Queen's mindset, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about empowering your mind, and not just empowering your mind, but walking in the authority and the dominion that God has given to you so that you're able to execute and overcome everything that he has placed before you.
I love it. I love it. Execute and overcome everything that he has placed before you. So, share with us how you even started doing this work.
Oh wow, I love that question. Listen, when I got started with Queen's Mindset, it was back in 2017, right? And so I was at a actual convention, a business convention. The speaker at the time, he was talking about jumping. He said sometimes we just have to jump. Many times in our head we want everything to be in order, we want all of our ducks in a row. And so he was encouraging us to just jump. And so when we break when the session break, I went back to my hotel room. I remember taking my phone up, and I don't even know it just came. I didn't have to think about it hard. I just said Queen's Mindset, and I started an Instagram page because I was always encouraging my friends, my family, people around me. I would always be the motivator, the one to encourage them, right? And help build their confidence as well. And I thought that I was only going to create an Instagram page and help to encourage other women too as well. Because I was like, why not just do it for other women and not just only my inner circle? And so immediately the name came. I started the Instagram page. I did a live, I did videos, and I thought that that was all that God wanted me to do. I had no idea that within a few years that God was going to expand it to the level as where it's at. And so that's what really birthed Queen's Mindset, because I just had a love for empowering women, helping women to push them and help them to walk in their purpose, helping them to realize their vision, who God says they are, who they're called to be, and how they can actually get there. And so, because of that passion, that's what birthed Queen's Mindset back in 2017.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I love how you're like, just jump.
Yeah.
just
Just jump.
just jump. I love how God will tell us the first step, and
Yeah.
then it's like, Lord, I don't have all the instructions. I don't know what this is going to look like, but I'm just going to jump.
Yeah.
Your story, it reminds me of how I got started in the work that I'm doing. So I was a business coach for a long time, for 7 or 8 years. And then
Wow.
after my third divorce, I went on this healing journey and I wrote what I call a book. It's like a pamphlet, y'all, but it's like a book. Okay. I wrote my story because God said, you need to share your story. So I wrote the book and I really thought that was it, right? That
Mhm.
was it. I was done. And God was like, oh no, there's so much more for
Wow.
you. And
Wow.
so if you guys are listening, I want you guys to think about what may have been your just jump moment. Was it you wrote a book and thought that was it? Did you go to a conference? Did you just say, you know what, I'm just going to get out here and get started with what God had for me? So I love that story. I love what you're doing because I feel like when I look at what you're doing, you are in purpose. I feel like you can tell when you meet someone and you're like, yeah, this is what God called them to do. And so I
Yeah.
want to talk a little bit about purpose today. The people that are listening, the women that are listening, they're women who are maybe single and they're in that stage of preparing for healthy love. And they're trying to figure out how important is my purpose as I'm in that preparing stage. Now, I don't like to say waiting for a relationship because waiting implies no motion. We're standing still, we're not taking action. But for those women who are preparing for a healthy relationship, how important do you think it is for us to pursue our purpose in that season?
Ooh, I love this question. You just have so many great questions. Listen, okay, so you're in the season, you're in preparation, but in order for you to even be able to fully understand that you're in the season, because sometimes we can be in the season and we're so oblivious to it, we don't even recognize that the time has come, right? Because we may be caught up with other things. But if we're talking about purpose, you really got to go with identity first. That's your first step, really, to understand who you are. Because if you have an understanding of who you are and what you've been called to, then it's easier for you to be able to execute. But if you're not sure, that's where the challenge comes. And that's where, you get all the confusion and you feel as though you're going around in circles, you're just stuck in the mud. But that's where we start. We start with that level of identity. And so from the time you have understand who you are, and whose you are and who you've been called to, now you're able to effectively prepare. Because in that space now, as you're preparing, you're going to do the things that are in alignment with who you are and what you've been called to. And so let's say, for example, in my case, me being called to women, then I have to align myself with those things that are close and dear to the hearts of women. Am I called to every area of a woman? Not necessarily, but I need to figure out what area is that I'm called to. So if I'm called to empowerment, what type of empowerment am I going to bring? And so these are the questions that you begin to answer yourself. And so when I'm able to identify, okay, the type of empowerment that I'm bringing is an empowerment where I help them to realize their purpose, I help them to walk out their vision, help them to execute the plan that God has created already for them, then I need to know what are the things that I need to put in place. Who do I need to become? Because that's the next thing. As soon as you identify, you now have to figure out who do you need to become. Because yes, you are called to it, but it's a process. It's a process that you have to go through so that you're able to get to the next level. And many times we don't want to be processed. We just want the end result, the finished product. We don't have no time going through that because it's hard, it's not easy. And nobody wants to do that. But think about being in the gym. When you're in the gym and you're working out, as soon as if you go on the first day, but you come back home, you are like, we call it here in Barbados, muscle bump. And so you're muscle bump because the muscles are tight, they're tense, they're hurting, it's painful, and you don't even know if you want to go tomorrow because this is enough. But think about it. What you did was that you began to work something that you didn't work before. And so that's where you're feeling the impact of it. It doesn't mean that it's not working. It just means that you're feeling the impact because now you're shifting the mindset. You're now changing the mindset, the way how you look, the way how you see things, and you're changing your body now to begin to accept exercise because you weren't accustomed to it before, and you're building that level of resistance. And as you're building resistance, you're going to build muscle. And so, what am I saying? So, if you are looking to figure out what is my purpose, first figure out your identity. Your identity leads you to that point of purpose where you're able to discover who you are and what you've been called to. And then, as you're going through the process, become comfortable with being processed so that you are able to build the muscle that is necessary for you to walk out that purpose that has been called to you. And then God is going to be able to align you now with the people that you've been called to. And it becomes easier as you keep making those steps. It becomes easier, just like the gym. Every day you keep going, and before you know it, you don't feel that muscle tension anymore. You don't feel that anymore. It's like second nature because you're continuously doing it. You're consistent at it. You're working at it. And that's where you're going to be able then to get the results.
I love it. I love
Yeah.
it. I want to touch on something that you said that I think is just so, so important in this season of healing and preparing is identity. One of the
Yes.
things that I ask a lot of my clients when we start working together is, who are you? And the biggest answer I get is, I don't know. Because particularly as women, when we get into relationships, we take on different roles. So it may be wife or mom or, these different roles. And then that relationship ends and we're kind of left with, well, who am I now? And one of the things that I believe kept me in a cycle of toxic, unhealthy relationships was during that time, I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what my purpose was. And so I would meet someone, and it was almost like my life, my purpose would shift to whatever they were doing, to whatever was important to them. Now, all of a sudden, this is my purpose. This is my life. And so a few things that you guys can do, if you're like, April, that's me, I don't even know who I am. One, go back to the maker, right? I've heard it said that if you want to know how something works, ask the creator. So start there, but then date yourself to get to know who you are. One of the things that I did in my healing journey is I made a list of stuff that just sounded fun. I went kayaking. I went to different comedy shows. I just did things that sounded fun. And what I realized was like, oh yeah, I like this. And someone was like, all right, I don't like that. Pottery, y'all, is not my thing. Cooking, not my thing at all. But start with getting to know God and then getting to know yourself. So, Kamisha, you have this framework, and I love the title of this framework. It is Reimagine Your Reality. Tell us about that framework.
Absolutely. And so reimagine your reality is actually something I was doing from the age of 4. And I never recognized that this was what I was doing. You see, at the age of 4, I came from a dysfunctional home. And I would remember at the age of 4, I sat before the television. I would just watch TV, whatever was showing at the time. And we only had one channel, right? And so I sat before the television and we watched our local shows. And I saw families who were coming together, they were eating together, they were traveling together. They dressed nice, they lived in expensive homes and drove expensive cars and stuff. And immediately at the age of 4, nobody told me, Kamisha, this is all acting. These are the actors and actresses. Immediately, I told myself, if they can do it, I can do it. Even though I'm not seeing it in my household right now, it doesn't mean that it's impossible. And so I began to visualize. I didn't know I was visualizing at the time, but I started visualizing. I started speaking the language. I started thinking about it. I literally was reimagining my reality because the reality that I had was that my family was very dysfunctional, where I would hear, arguments happening. Sometimes there will be fights happening in the household. We weren't necessarily like poor, but we were very close to the poverty line. There were many times where I couldn't afford certain things like some of my other friends. I had to live a little bit different because money was always tight for my mother and my father. And I was seeing that consistently in before me. And so there was only one person in my family that was able to go to college, and I decided I was going to be number 2. I had to be number two because I taught myself that the way to get out of this rat race, the way to get out of this cycle of poverty was for me to do better than what I was seeing. And so I continuously just watched it on television and I determined in my mind that I was going to pursue that. So one of the things that I did, which became part of the framework, is that I needed to find out who I was. Again, it starts with identity. And so I started questioning a lot. I started questioning God because one of the things that my parents did that I really am grateful for is that they ensured that my sister and I, were in church. And so I had to go to church on Saturdays and I went to church on Sundays because my dad was 70s and my mom Pentecost. So I had a little bit of both worlds, right? And so in doing that, I was questioning God, why this, why that, why this? And I had so many questions. And that helped me to understand who I was and who I was called to be. And I began to learn more of what He said about me, what He talks about me, how He sees me, how He views me, how I'm supposed to be able to view myself. And that I am more. There's so much more to me. There's so much to me. Like, I'm so great in His eyes. And so when I began to see myself the way that God sees me, is when my mindset began to shift. That's another phase. It's about shifting the mindset again. I started to revisit the way how I was speaking, one, because my environment was teaching me certain languages, and I recognized that that language was a language of poverty. That language was a language of delay. That language was a language of setback. That language was not the language that would have gotten me to the place that I wanted to go. So I needed to speak from a place of abundance. I needed to speak from a place of growth. I needed to speak from a place of more. Even though I knew that I was limited with resources or limited with income because of the finances and so on, I never spoke like that. I always spoke like I had more. I remember, as I'm speaking now, sometimes my friends, they would say, "Oh my goodness, if I didn't know who you are and where you came from, I literally would think that you were super rich, that you had to be a millionaire," because I had a millionaire mindset. I would go to the back door. I remember this so plainly. I would go to the back door and I literally would shout on the top of my lungs, "I'm a millionaire! I'm a millionaire!" And my mom would say, "Stop that. The neighbors are going to want to know what's going on with you." And I'm like, "I'm a millionaire." And then she would start to laugh. And then eventually she accepted that I'm a millionaire and she started saying it too. And that's it. I shifted the mindset. I shifted how I spoke. I shifted how I saw myself. I never looked down upon myself because of my current circumstances, but I always spoke higher of myself. So that was the second part to the reimagining your reality framework. Now, the third part was purpose, because now that I've understand who I am and now I've been able to shift my mindset and how I see myself, I had to understand, God, what is the purpose? Why did you create me? What have I been called for? And it took me some time to get it together, but eventually I was able to see this is what I've been called to. I've been called to help women. I've been called to help them. I've been here to help them birth their vision and walk in their purpose. And as soon as I was able to recognize that, then I was able to walk that out. Then it took me to the next phase of the reimagining, and that was alignment. There were some things that I needed to come into alignment with, and that was God's word. Because if I'm going to walk out in His purpose, I need to be in alignment with His word so that I can be able to receive the results that He has called me to. Because the vision was given to me by Him. And if He's the one who gave me the vision, then He must have the plan. He has the plan. The manufacturer always has a plan later, right? And so I had to be in tune with that. I had to be able to align with that so that I can understand the necessary principles that I needed to execute so that I can be successful. And then the next phase was my faith. I needed to elevate that. I needed to be able to trust Him beyond the place where I could trace Him, because I'm reimagining my reality. And so if you're going to imagine something, it means that it has only taken place in your mind. It has not yet come to a fruition as yet. It's not that it can't happen, but you're reimagining it. So you're shifting. So it meant that my faith needed to be stretched. And so I needed to believe beyond a shadow of a doubt. And I needed to trust Him through the process. I needed to trust that He would supply when He said He would. I needed to trust the whole process of everything. And even though it didn't look like it was together, I needed to believe that it will come together. And then the final phase to that was persistence. Because even in all of that, the enemy is going to always fight you. You're going to have people going to say it's not possible, you can't do this, and they're going to say some stuff, and you need to be persistent after the dream, after the purpose, after the vision. And so that's what I needed to learn, to become persistent, because it's all a part of me being able to reimagine. It meant that what I saw in my mind, I believe that it can be possible, and I was willing to do whatever it takes for however long it took so that I could receive what it is that God has called me to. And that's what really built the reimagining framework. That's actually the layout of the framework there in a very small nutshell, just to give you guys an idea. And that's what I've been employing ever since.
I love it. I love it. So it starts with our mind, right? It
Yes.
always starts with what we're thinking.
Yes.
It is understanding our identity. It is
Yes.
walking out and pursuing our purpose, standing on our faith, and then being persistent. And I feel like this framework is perfect for the person who is preparing for those healthy relationships. Because one of the first things that we have to do is we have to change our mindset about who we are, what we
Mhm.
deserve, what
Mhm.
healthy relationships look like. I know
Exactly.
so many times we get stuck in these cycles of unhealthy relationships because a lot of times we simply in our mind say, I don't deserve more or I don't deserve better. It is the perception that we have
Yeah.
of ourselves that a lot of times will hold us back. And that will stem
Yeah.
from whether it's our upbringing, that will stem from past traumas, the narratives that we've told ourselves, the narratives that other people have told us about who we are. And that is why it's so important to understand our God given identity. And who is it that God says that we are and not who the world says that we are? I'll tell you, it was not the easiest thing to, start sharing about, yeah, I'm a Christian and I've been married 3 times because I was so tempted to have that be my identity and my label, right? That was going to be who I was. And then I had to take a step back and be like, wait a minute, God, this can't be all that I am. Like, it just can't be. And so, one of the things that I had to do was to shift my mentality about who I was. Being a divorcee was just a small part of my identity. It was such a small part of what made up April, right? And then going back to purpose. So I want to talk about how purpose plays into choosing partners. When we don't know who we are, when we don't know what we're called to do, unfortunately, what happens is we pick partners that don't align with that purpose. And then you see those relationships, you see those marriages that are like, man, we can't figure out like what's going on. And honestly, your purpose just doesn't align. So, why do you think it's so important that we know our purpose and how that applies to us choosing our life partners?
That's a really deep one right there. Listen, oh my goodness. Because of who we are, right? We've been called for more. God has created us to do with a purpose. He has created us to go out and to conquer, to overcome. And not only did he create us for that, but marriage is a ministry. And many times people don't see it as that. Many people are saying marriage is just, oh, I'm looking for a companion. I want someone to love and someone to share stuff with. That's a part of it. But the main purpose of marriage is really ministry, because two of you are coming together to help you overcome. There's power in numbers, right? And so it's important that you understand who you are and what your purpose is, because if you're still trying to figure that out, chances are you're not ready for marriage. You're not ready to be there, because you may today in this space, if you're not ready yet, and let's say you don't know what your purpose is, you haven't identified it, you're not walking in it, and then you are married, and you're with this person. At that point, when you met that person, maybe that person knows what their purpose is, and they're walking in it, and that's good. But let's say now, okay, within a year's time, you don't discover who you are, you don't discover your purpose. No, it's going to be unequally yoked, because you want to go left and he wants to go right, and that's going to bring a lot of arguments. It's going to bring a lot of division. It's going to be hard now, because now you're trying to fix something that has already been created after the fact, and that's what brings a lot of challenges, and that's why a lot of the divorce numbers are really increasing, because now you're not able to meet at a point where you should have been meeting, and you don't have a helpmate. You now have someone who you may feel as though that person now is stopping you from progressing, whereas that person is on a whole nother trajectory, and that's what is not aligning. You're going two different paths, and so that is what's going to force the separation to come. And so it's very important that you spend time in learning who you are and whose God says you are, and that you begin to walk in that space and you learn it, you grow through it. Don't rush the process, because I know everybody is looking on social media and it all looks really pretty, it looks really great. They're posting all these pictures and you're thinking, oh my goodness, I can't wait to have that. But you're not sure what's happening behind the scenes. It's just a picture moment. It's just for the gram. And so let's not be concerned about what we're seeing out there, but be more concerned about you making sure that you are walking in alignment with what God has called you to be, because there's something on the inside of you that you've been called to birth. And the thing about it is that there's just not one person that may be waiting on you. You may have a nation that is waiting on you. You may have a generation that is waiting on you. You don't know who exactly you're called to until you're able to identify. I don't want to get too biblical, but if you go back to the scripture, Esther, she was sent to free an entire nation. She was said to be an entire nation, and that was already birthed from the time of birth. That was already planted on the inside of her, and she had no clue that that was the plan. You don't know who you've been called to until you're able to discover the purpose. And when you are able to marry correctly, where you're able to identify your purpose, you are now able to choose or select the right person because they come into alignment with who you are. And then it makes the marriage process a lot easier for you, because now you're able to walk it out easy. You guys can build together. You're in agreement. I'm not saying you're not going to have disagreements, things will not happen, but you're in agreement because the vision is clear. It's not cloudy anymore. It's clear. And so now you can walk that out. And so, yes, it's definitely important that you identify your vision, identify your purpose before you even begin to go into anything, even something such as dating. Because if you don't know who you are and what you want, you can't date, because you're going to accept anything that comes because you're not sure what you want. Right now, you're trying to figure it out. And so I would say spend the time, figure it out first, know it first, and then you make the step to start to date, and then you can progress into marriage and have the understanding that you're marrying for purpose, you're marrying for ministry.
I love it. I love it. Marrying for purpose and marrying for ministry. I was
Yes.
talking to a gentleman a few weeks ago, and we were talking about when you hear those couples that say, we grew apart, we fell out of love, right?
Yeah.
And I asked myself, what does that really mean? And what I think
Mhm.
contributes to the we fell apart, we're going two different directions, is that when you have two people who don't know who they are going into a marriage, and then, just like you said, they start to discover who they are in that marriage and then realize, oh, wait a minute, we don't really align as we thought we did. Our purposes don't align the way we thought we did. Now, I don't think that that is quote unquote cause for divorce, but it does lead to those feelings of we're not heading in the same directions. We're growing apart because we weren't secure in who we were when we got married, before we got married. So I think it is vital to know your purpose before you get into a healthy relationship, before you start dating. Because, like you said, when you are dating and when you're dating with intention, you're dating to find a life partner, you're dating for marriage. And so, how can you say you're absolutely ready for that if you don't know who you are and what God has called you to do? Because if God said, hey, I have called you to travel the world, and God tells your spouse, I have called you to this one city, we might have to talk about what that looks like. And that could cause some problems down the line in our relationship when we're both trying to pursue our purpose. So I want to talk about something else that happens in relationships when we don't know our purpose, and that is losing our identity. So we touched on this a little bit earlier, the importance
Mhm.
of our identity, but how does not knowing our purpose play a role in losing our identity in a relationship?
Ooh, good again. Listen, when you don't know who you are, then it means that you become everything to everyone because you're not sure. So you're scattered, you're being pulled here, you're being pulled there. You are not able to zone in on where you've been called to because you're still yet confused, you're not sure. And that's very detrimental, not only just for your advancement, but it's detrimental too for your health. Because what happens is that you allow yourself to be caught in unnecessary situations that then builds up. I call it not just a residue, but it builds up a space now for wounds. It opens up wounds. And that's where now we have a lot of people who are dealing with unforgiveness. They're dealing with betrayal. They're dealing with so many other things that are happening, rejection, disappointment. They're dealing with all of these things because they're not sure. And because you're not sure and you're doing it so openly and willingly, you're trying to please everyone because you're still trying to figure it out. That's where you're opening up these wounds. That's where you're getting yourself hurt. And if we don't take that time to really sit down, do some self reflection, and to go through the process, I know in the beginning of it all, it does not look pretty. It's not cute. It's not cute because what's happening is that you're unearthing some things that are there. And sometimes where you are may not even have anything to do with you, but because of where you came from. Let's say, for example, for me, coming from a dysfunctional home, had I not decided that I was not going to take that on with me and I was willing to break that at me, then I could have entered into that agreement with that, and I would have had that level of dysfunction following me. And so sometimes, because of where we came from and what we are attached to, we have certain weights on our shoulders. And that's where we find ourselves in certain environments, in certain spaces, because we've been taught this thing, but society has taught us this. So we know that, say, for example, if you came up in a household, for me, my dad, he cheated on my mom. 13 years they were together, and he cheated on her, tirelessly along that path, up until the point that he actually did get a child outside of their relationship, who turned out to be just about 3 weeks apart from my other sister. So both my mom and another lady was pregnant around the same time. And so what happened there is that I saw that. And so I saw that he was the best father any girl could have. I was a total princess, a total queen. He treated me like royalty, like majesty. He treated me really well. But then in the relationship, the breakdown was that he was not being the man that he was called to be, or that God had chosen him to be. And then there were some things that I had to identify and understand why. And I only understood that after the fact. And that was because he himself was also dealing with some stuff. He was also dealing with so many different things: rejection as a child, the fact that he lost both of his parents at the age of 7. So he had to deal with rejection. He was an orphan. And so he felt like nobody wanted him. He had abandonment issues. And so he didn't know how to love. And so sometimes when you are in a space like that, that's what creates, and that's why there's a disconnect with the identity, because you have picked up things that were taught to you indirectly. It's not that people literally sat and taught you that, but you pick that up from your environment and you think that this is what it's supposed to be. And so it's a process where you have to unlearn some things so that you can become the best healed version of yourself, identifying who you are, and then you're in a better space now so that you can be able to make the best decisions for your life, and you're able to become what God has called you to be. Yep.
Man, that is so powerful. You said
Yeah.
something when you first start talking about when we don't know who we are, we try to become everything to everybody. And so
Yes.
we've seen we all know people in relationships that they are completely overwhelmed. They are completely
Yeah.
burned out. They are just a shell of themselves because
Mhm.
I think what you said is spot on. Not knowing who you are, not knowing your purpose. And then you get into this relationship and you're just trying to be everything to everybody. And you simply can't do that. You can't last. Your relationship won't last doing that. So I think that is so profound about why you need to know who you are, why you need to know your purpose going into this relationship. And I think so many more relationships could either be saved or would be
Mhm.
healthier if this
Yeah.
wasn't the case. If we just knew how to stay in our lane in our relationship, right?
Yep. That's right. That's right.
Just stay
That
in
is
your
right.
lane. And then as I'm
Yeah.
listening to you talk, I think about my relationships. People ask me all the time, "Girl, how did you do this 3 times?" And I tell people I married the same man 3 times. He just had a different name
Wow.
because I didn't know who I was.
Yeah.
So I grew up in different situations where one of my parents was an addict. So now I've got this rejection that I'm carrying around. I did not ever feel like I was loved through things like sexual abuse. I didn't feel like I was valued, that my body had any value. And so I would get into these relationships not knowing who I was, and then I would just become whatever I felt like they needed. And then
Yeah.
eventually that would breed resentment with me and with him. Our relationship would fall apart, and here I am, divorced again. And
Wow.
so when I think about purpose, when I think about identity being the foundation of what we need to be building upon in this season of preparing for healthy relationships, I think about that woman who says, "Look, I don't have time for all of
Oh,
this," right? And I don't think that building identity, building your purpose, and pursuing a healthy relationship is a either or, but I think there's a process to it. So what does that look like when someone says, "You know what? I don't know how to do this." How can a woman still put effort into, still put her priority of building her purpose first, but then also be that woman who says, "You know what? I think I'm ready for a relationship." What does that look like?
I think what that really looks like is, you see, the relationship with brokenness needs to be fixed. Too many women are broken. And one, we don't want to identify as that because of the negative connotation towards it. And so nobody wants to say that. There's a pride side to it. So we don't want to agree with that. But if we really begin to zone in, we'll recognize, there are many parts of us that are broken. And it's not just because of decisions that we've made, but sometimes it's just like, again, your environment, the circumstances that has all created that. And I think if persons are able to address that level of brokenness, it begins to set them free. And if you are set free, it means now you have clarity. And if you have clarity now, you're able to start to make the right decisions. And so now you're able then to really embrace who you are. And now you're able to fully walk out what you've been called to. And so I think to be able to get to that place, we have to identify that there is some level of brokenness. Every individual is going to be at a different level, and that's okay. But to identify it and accept it and deal with it. Because you're not just accepting it so that you can dwell on it and we have a pity party. That's not what we're doing. We're going to accept it, identify it, and then we're going to fix it so that now you can be repaired, you can be restored, and you can now become the person that you've been called to. But if you continue to wallow in that level of brokenness, it's going to cloud your vision at every turn. Every turn is going to cloud your vision, and you're going to make decisions from a broken place. So, which means that when you get out of that broken place, when you look back, you're like, oh my goodness. That's why I chose this person. That's why I had this person as a friend, or that's why I was in a relationship with this individual, because there was a broken side of me that was connected to the broken side of that individual. And so we collided because we both had a challenge with rejection. We both had a challenge with abandonment. We both had a challenge. And so that's where we were able to identify at. But when you go to the place where you fix what is there, now when you meet that person or when you select that person that you want to be in a relationship with, you are now identifying them because of purpose. You're not identifying them because of the ministry. You're not identifying them because of the call upon your life. And that's what needs to occur.
I love it. I love it. Identifying those spaces in us that were broken. It's
Yes.
interesting. When I went to therapy for the first time after my third divorce, the first question she asked me was, "Tell me about your childhood." And I was like, "I'm not
Mm,
here about my childhood. I'm here
yeah.
because I keep getting divorced every 10 years." And so she said, "Tell me about your childhood." And
Yeah.
what it did, that journey allowed me to see those pieces that were broken that needed to be healed. And I want you guys to understand, that are listening, we're not saying that, you're never ready for a healthy relationship until like your life is perfect. Not saying that by far, because none of us are perfect. But what we are saying is that it's very important to make sure you got a solid foundation.
Yeah.
with your identity and with your purpose. And I do believe with the right person, you just continue to grow that purpose, and God continues to open up the doors for you to see how this person becomes a part of your purpose and you guys do life together. So
Yeah.
if you're listening and you're like, well, man, life is never going to be perfect. It's not. But having that right foundation of knowing who you are in Christ, knowing just what you like in life, like who are you, being able to describe who you are to yourself, to your future partner, knowing what your purpose is, what God has called you to do, that is what's going to set the foundation for that healthy relationship. So, Kamisha, I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you again for being on the show. I think I've waited probably a year to talk to you. So I'm very honored to have you here. But before we go, I just want you, if there's a woman that's listening, what are just some final kind of closing remarks that you would share to encourage her to continue to pursue her identity in who she is and pursue her purpose?
I love that. And so, to that woman right now who's listening or maybe watching us, I want to encourage you. I want to remind you that you didn't stumble on this podcast by chance. There's definitely something that we would have shared here today that God wants you to be able to gain from this conversation. And I want to remind you that you're called for greater, you're called for more. And despite this current circumstance, despite what it may look like, it does not mean that it's not possible. It just means that there must be some form of work that needs to be done. There's a process that needs to occur. And I want to invite you to allow yourself to go through the process. And don't take that time comparing yourself to others. I know we have a time stamp on everything as women. We need things to happen in a particular time and we need them to happen in a specific order. But if you can, for just a second, just allow yourself to be free. Be free to the process. Open yourself to the process. Allow complete healing to take place. Allow yourself to discover who you are. I mean, like truly discover who you are. And I promise you that if you allow yourself to truly discover who you are, that person that you meet is the person that you're going to tell yourself, I wish I've met this person ever since. Because that's the person that's going to take you to the next phase. And for that woman, you're watching right now, you've already discovered who you are. You have an idea. You know what it is. You're already walking in it. But there's still some questions that are lingering. And I wanna invite you to lean a little bit more on God. And the reason why I want to invite you to lean on him, because remember, he's the one that has given us the purpose. And so he has the plan, he has the map for it. And sometimes we're trying to do it all by ourselves because we have this sense of self-control. We want to be in charge. We feel like we can get it done. But it's okay to ask for help. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. And it's okay if you go to him and you say, because that's what he wants. You ask him to help you to complete what he has already given to you as a mandate. And he's going to provide you the resources, he's going to provide you the steps. If you just listen, if you just take a moment, if you just put everything down and don't worry about everyone else that is waiting on you. They can't get the best of you if you're still stuck in between. And so this is a moment for you to hear, to have clarity so that you get the guidance that is necessary so then you can go out and you can conquer. Remember, you can't pour from an empty cup. Whenever you begin to pour, it must be from the overflow because you need something yourself so that you can take yourself through the process. And so it's okay if you take a moment, take a beat, shut everything down, and you just revamp, you refresh, and then you go again. And I promise you, when you do that, you're going to accelerate. You're going to break some barriers. You're going to shift some things. You're going to make a mark and a name for yourself up there because that's what you've been called to, is already on the inside of you. Do not give up on yourself. Keep striving, keep building, keep being persistent because that's vision, that purpose that you are already in is definitely going to be fulfilled and it will surely come to pass.
I love it. Girl, you just encouraged me. I know I said encourage the people listening, but you just gave me a whole new sense of encouragement with that. Yes, y'all. Yes. So, Kamisha, if someone is listening and they say, you know what, I want to get in touch with her, I want to learn more about her, I want to learn more from her, where can someone connect with you?
You can connect with me on Instagram. So you can find us on Instagram at Queen's Mindset, on Facebook, Queen's Mindset as well, on YouTube at Queen's Mindset. If you want to send us an email, you can actually send us an email at queensmindset.qm@gmail.com. Or you can actually go to our website at www.queensmindset.net, and all the information will be right there for you.
Awesome. So, Kamisha, thank you again for being my guest. If you guys are listening and you're saying, I love her, I love what she has to say, connect with her. But, Kamisha, thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. It was definitely a pleasure.
All right, y'all. So I hope and pray that this episode blessed you guys. We pray before every episode. Like I pray with every guest. We pray that the things that we talk about is going to be a blessing to you. So I hope that you did that. If you guys are looking for more resources, you want to connect with me, just go to whenlovecomes.com. There's additional resources over there. You can get like all the access to things that are coming up. So connect with me there. And then just make sure that you guys stay connected for resources so that you're ready when love finds you.